Picture an appliance that operates entirely on a solitary spark, no bigger than the flame on a birthday cake. The chillier you need the inside to be, the larger you make that tiny fire. No power cords, no humming compressors, no electrical outlets, and absolutely zero need for refueling for decades on end. You put fire in, and you get ice out. It genuinely sounds like a piece of magic from a fantasy novel. And practically any high school science teacher would swear it breaks the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. But this appliance is absolutely real. It has been quietly chilling food inside Amish homes across Ohio and Pennsylvania for nearly a century. And the genius whose signature graces the official United States patent for this device, he happens to be the single most renowned scientist of the 1900s. That patent was officially approved on a Tuesday in November 1930. Yet, half a year prior, a quartet of businessmen down in Atlanta had already devised a plan to kill the technology entirely. Stick around, because by the time this video wraps up, you will know exactly why they did it. Last fall, I shook hands with a man who has one of these in his kitchen. We will call him Amish. He is a man in his late 60s, sporting a neatly squared-off gray beard, and he graciously permitted me to snap some pictures of his cooling unit for my research. His property is tucked away down a dirt driveway, a few miles past the town limits of Berlin, Ohio. Berlin serves as the unacknowledged headquarters of the globe's most expansive Amish community. We are talking about nearly 40,000 individuals living across a handful of counties. There are 0 public power lines connecting his land to the grid, and you will not spot a single solar panel on his roof. Amish guided me into his kitchen, tugged open a low-access door on the appliance, and gestured toward a minuscule blue spark dancing inside a steel tube roughly the size of my thumb. He spoke so softly I had to lean in to catch it. 1996, he told me. What he meant was that specific little fire has been burning without interruption since 1996. That is nearly 3 decades of non-stop ignition. 0 maintenance, no repair technicians, just a regular propane cylinder sitting in the backyard that gets topped off a couple of times a year at the neighborhood supply shop. This specific cooler was manufactured by an Ohio enterprise known as Easy Freeze. It was started by and remains under the ownership of Amish artisans. Each refrigerator they sell includes a 7-year guarantee on the cooling mechanism, and every single one is pushed to its limits for a minimum of 12 hours in a sweltering test chamber exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit prior to ever being boxed up and shipped. Think about that for a moment. The typical American plug-in refrigerator heads to the dump after maybe 13 years because the sealed compressor gives out, and fixing it is pricier than simply buying a brand new replacement. Amish's appliance has already survived long enough to outlive 2 standard electric refrigerators. It relies on that exact same flame, those exact same principles of physics, and the quiet magic of chemical reactions occurring out of sight behind a door he essentially never touches. Just one fire. And the academic principles powering this have been documented in peer-reviewed scientific literature as far back as 1824. Now, here is the concept that defies belief. You can utilize pure heat to generate freezing temperatures. I am not speaking poetically. I mean literal, quantifiable cold. The English scientist Michael Faraday authored the initial academic study on this phenomenon back in 1824, and the scientific process is known as absorption refrigeration. The entire closed system relies on merely 3 ingredients: ammonia, water, and hydrogen gas. Locked away inside a continuous loop of copper plumbing, this trio performs a trick that feels practically like sorcery. At the base of the machine, the flame warms a small boiler containing a mixture of water and ammonia. Because ammonia reaches its boiling point at a much cooler temperature than water, it turns into a vapor and travels upward through the pipes. Once it hits the peak of the system, this vapor passes into a condenser where it sheds its warmth into the surrounding room, transforming the ammonia back into a liquid state. That fluid then trickles down into a designated evaporation space that is packed with hydrogen gas. The moment the liquid ammonia interacts with that hydrogen, it instantly flashes back into a vapor, and the act of evaporation inherently sucks up surrounding heat. It is the identical scientific mechanism that allows sweat to drop your body temperature on a blistering summer afternoon. Only this time, the reaction is contained within a closed metal tube winding its way around the inner lining of your freezer. The warmth is literally extracted from your groceries and absorbed by the ammonia vapor. That gas then floats down into an absorber, mixes with clean water, dissolves right back into a liquid state, and rides gravity straight down to the heating tank to begin the entire dance over again. A single fire at the base, and absolutely nothing else. No motors, no pumps, zero mechanical parts other than a simple temperature dial. Nothing except for thermal energy, gravity, and a trio of elements perpetually following one another through copper tubing until one of them successfully drains the heat right out of your milk. Researchers over in Germany at the University of Oldenburg actually reconstructed a 1930 prototype back in 2005 using a tiny heat source, roughly the size of a pen cap. They forced the internal temperature all the way down to 0 degrees Celsius. Freezing temperatures born from a fire. Let that sink in for a moment, because practically every physics manual defines cold merely as the lack of heat. This device, however, approaches cold as a product you actively generate by shifting thermal energy through a circuit. One flame, cold milk. That is Now, the initial functional model employing this concept was not constructed by Einstein. It was pieced together by a pair of broke engineering undergrads over in Stockholm back in 1922. Their names were Baltzar von Platen and Karl Munters. They were studying at the Royal Institute of Technology, and they were co-authoring a thesis that von Platen quite literally named the problem refrigerator without moving parts. To save cash, they shared a single room. They skipped their lectures. They labored through the night in a workspace they could barely afford to rent. By March 8, 1923, they secured their patent in Sweden. A tiny local manufacturer known as AB Arctic began producing the device right away. A couple of years later, in 1925, a massive appliance corporation called Electrolux swooped in, purchased AB Arctic completely, and debuted the planet's first commercially mass-produced absorption refrigerator for residential homes. The massive Electrolux advertising blitz across Europe relied on a lone slogan that became legendary in its era, "The flame that freezes." That was their pitch. They plastered it across shop displays, along the sides of streetcars, and in massive newspaper spreads. They branded the machine the Wonder Box, and it took off like wildfire, simply because the mechanics felt utterly miraculous to a public who had previously only ever seen ice hauled in by horse-drawn wagons. That very same year, 1925, Electrolux penned a manufacturing agreement with an American outfit named Serval, based out of Evansville, Indiana, to construct the appliance for the domestic market. By 1927, Serval introduced its premier commercial gas-powered fridge. From that moment until 1956, Serval stood as the sole American producer of these flame-driven refrigerators. 3 decades, hundreds of thousands of units rolling off the line. Evansville became so utterly dominated by this business that the town earned the public moniker as the refrigerator capital of the United States. During its post-war zenith, they were pumping out around 3,800 units a day and providing paychecks to 10,000 hands across 3 separate plants. There was even a collegiate football showdown dubbed the Refrigerator Bowl, hosted at Wright Stadium annually from 1948 until 1956. A whole American metropolis practically built itself around a tiny flame. Yet, virtually no one younger than 70 has any memory of this today, all because of what unfolded next. Back in 1926, newspapers circulating in Berlin reported on a horrifying incident where an entire household was discovered lifeless in their flat. A fire did not cause it. It was not foul play. The culprit was a compromised seal on their brand new electric refrigerator. Early compressor-driven fridges relied on methyl chloride, sulfur dioxide, or straight ammonia as their coolants. Every single one of those is poisonous. Any of the 3 is fully capable of suffocating a slumbering family in a sealed bedroom if the rubber gasket on the compressor gives way in the dead of night. Albert Einstein actually read that newspaper report, and it unsettled him so deeply that he contacted his old graduate assistant, a brilliant young Hungarian physicist named Leo Szilard, with a specific pitch: design a superior refrigerator. Create one completely devoid of moving parts that could potentially leak. One powered solely by thermal energy, similar to the Platen-Munters model, but inherently safer, more sophisticated, and capable of operating for a century without requiring a service call. From 1926 straight through to 1934, Einstein and Szilard collaborated on this in Berlin. They submitted 45 distinct patent requests spanning half a dozen nations. They engineered 3 completely unique refrigeration setups, relying on 3 separate laws of physics: absorption, diffusion, and electromagnetic compression. On November 11, 1930, the United States Patent Office awarded them patent number 1,781,541. That exact document resides in the vaults of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office out in Alexandria, Virginia, right this very second. You can go read it today. Anyone is allowed to. Their blueprint utilized 3 specific liquids: water, ammonia, and butane, all trapped within a continuous circuit operating under a steady pressure. 0 moving pieces, 0 chance of a toxic leak. Experts back then calculated the machine could operate flawlessly for a century before breaking down. For their trouble, Einstein and Szilard took home a grand total of $750, which translates to about 10 grand today. Electrolux discreetly purchased their most viable blueprints and essentially buried them within their existing Swedish manufacturing operations. Interestingly, one of those 3 concepts, the Einstein-Szilard electromagnetic pump, contained absolutely no conventional moving mechanics and was actually repurposed later to chill sodium-cooled breeder reactors at the dawn of the Cold War. Einstein was awarded just a single patent for a household consumer item over his entire life. This was it: a cooler powered by fire. And during the exact same calendar year that patent earned approval, a rival innovation debuted down in Atlanta and effectively killed it before it ever saw the inside of an American home. Fast forward to April of 1930, half a year prior to Einstein receiving his official patent, a chemical engineer by the name of Thomas Midgley stepped up to a podium at the American Chemical Society gathering in Atlanta. He was dispatched by 4 powerful figures. There was Charles Kettering, General Motors research chief and Midgley's personal mentor, Pierre DuPont, of the massive DuPont chemical dynasty, who already sold sulfur dioxide to GM's Frigidaire branch. Alfred Sloan, the head of General Motors, who viewed a fully electrified American household as the most lucrative retail market in human history. And finally, Midgley himself, the very guy who had already unleashed leaded gasoline upon the planet, a man whom environmental scholars now regard as the single human being responsible for more atmospheric destruction than anyone else in history. That day in Atlanta, Midgley approached the stage, dumped a translucent fluid into a small glass dish, and warmed it until it turned to gas. He took a deep breath of the fumes. He pivoted toward a burning candle sitting on the table. He blew out softly. The flame died. The crowd was left completely speechless. This new vapor was not poisonous. It was not explosive. It possessed the unique ability to actively snuff out a fire rather than fuel it. Midgley had just unveiled dichlorodifluoromethane to the public. Shortly after, they slapped a trademark on it: Freon. Now, here is the crucial piece of the puzzle that usually gets left out. Only one corporation was allowed to produce Freon. Shortly following that dramatic stage presentation, General Motors and DuPont forged a partnership dubbed Kinetic Chemicals, built with the explicit purpose of churning out Freon and leasing the rights to practically every other fridge maker in the country. They held a vice grip on those Freon patents. The production method was a heavily guarded secret. While anyone handy with metal could construct Einstein's absorption model using basic copper tubing and everyday chemicals, Freon demanded a highly specialized industrial setup that you had to rent from Kinetic. Furthermore, Freon introduced a financial ecosystem that Einstein's little flame could never hope to beat. A Freon fridge needs a compressor. That compressor needs constant electricity. That electricity requires you to be hooked up to a municipal grid. And the appliance itself mandates a fresh injection of coolant every time the system inevitably leaks, guaranteeing endless service appointments for as long as you own it. Einstein's invention was something you bought once and ran for 100 years on a match. Freon, on the other hand, was an absolute cash cow built on perpetual recurring revenue. Merely 5 years after that candle trick in Atlanta, Frigidaire and rival companies relying on Freon moved over 8 million units across America. The Einstein-Szilard blueprint, the Platen-Munters concept, and every single fire-driven refrigerator ever made were subtly shoved out of the spotlight. They did not fail. They simply functioned way too flawlessly for an industry obsessed with repeat customers. 4 decades later, researchers realized Freon was tearing a massive hole straight through the ozone layer. The Montreal Protocol finally banned it in 1987. Midgley himself had passed away well before that, back in 1944, and the way he died remains one of the most bizarre footnotes in American corporate history. At 51, he caught polio and was left paralyzed from the waist down. Ever the tinkerer, he rigged up a complex web of cords, harnesses, and pulleys to hoist himself out of his bed every morning. On November 2nd, 1944, they found him dead in his Worthington, Ohio bedroom. He had managed to get hopelessly tangled in his own custom pulley contraption. The individual responsible for killing the flame-powered fridge and gifting the world leaded fuel was ultimately suffocated by his own creation. Meanwhile, Einstein's official patent just gathered dust in Washington. Perfectly functional, yet entirely forgotten. Real quick, if you are enjoying this deep dive, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe, because I am about to reveal a piece of history I uncovered in the archives, and it is easily the most ridiculous twist in this whole saga. From 1930 up through 1957, the Serval Corporation out in Evansville actually continued assembling flame-driven refrigerators for Americans residing off the grid. We are talking agricultural workers, country households, hunting camp owners, basically anyone stationed too far from municipal power lines to warrant a Freon appliance. At the height of their post-war boom, Serval had 7,000 hands on deck, churning out gas fridges right alongside gas water heaters and the initial wave of residential gas-powered air conditioners. Back in 1939, Electrolux Serval debuted a home gas air conditioning unit at the New York World's Fair. They dubbed the showcase the Magic Caves of Ice, and they set up this entire display within a pavilion they officially titled the Court of Flame. The vintage marketing brochures are still locked away in the Indiana Historical Society vaults. That exact moniker, Court of Flame, is literally printed on the authorized map of the fairgrounds. A full 10 years into the total dominance of Freon, Serval was still out there in the middle of New York City, actively preaching to the public that the future of refrigeration was fire. Then 1942 rolled around, and the U.S. Armed Forces essentially took over the Serval plants for the war effort. From that year until the close of the Second World War, Serval constructed upwards of 6,000 sets of wings for the P-47 Thunderbolt combat aircraft. The very assembly belts that formerly turned out kitchen appliance shells were completely overhauled to manufacture anti-tank explosives, artillery shell casings, and portable heating units for military field kitchens. An appliance manufacturer suddenly churning out munitions and plane parts. Once the conflict wrapped up, Serval pivoted right back to household goods. Their 1948 marketing materials featured a very straightforward promise printed in bold letters. It claimed the unit remains completely quiet and outlives the competition because it creates ice without any moving mechanics. Then, in 1957, Serval filed for bankruptcy. That exact same year, the Refrigerator Bowl football game was scrapped due to dwindling attendance. Whirlpool eventually scooped up the facility in 1958, utilizing it merely as a storage depot right up until they relocated their operations down to Mexico in 2010. That massive Evansville complex, formerly the refrigeration hub of the nation, stood abandoned for years until it completely burned down during a massive blaze in October of 2022. Over a century of manufacturing legacy erased in mere hours. You certainly will not stumble across a brand new Serval gas cooler in your local big box store nowadays, but you can absolutely still catch them in action. A dedicated niche of enthusiasts actually runs a forum entirely devoted to classic Serval models produced from 1927 up to 1956. Some of those machines are approaching their 90th birthdays, and they are functioning flawlessly, still freezing, still relying on that lone spark hidden behind a metal door, a flame that has been ignited since before the vast majority of you watching this were even alive. The Amish community, however, never let the secret die. Both the Lancaster County community in Pennsylvania and the massive Holmes County hub over in Ohio are filled with households that intentionally reject public power grids. It is a deliberate lifestyle, not an economic necessity. They view municipal electricity as a physical chain to modern society, one that compromises the isolation demanded by their faith. Therefore, when Serval shuttered its doors in 1957, and the conventional appliance sector walked away from gas cooling, the Amish just continued utilizing the machines they already possessed. And the moment spare components became scarce, they simply began fabricating their own. That outfit, Easy Freeze, the very same crew that constructed Amos's cooler out in Holmes County, was established by Amish tradesmen with the direct goal of preserving the absorption refrigerator. The appliances they turn out right now rely on the exact same triple liquid alchemy that Einstein and Szilard secured the rights to back on that chilly November afternoon in 1930. Their biggest configurations accommodate up to 21 cubic feet of groceries. They start dropping the internal temperature within 60 minutes of sparking the burner, hitting maximum chill within 8 to 12 hours. Just a stone's throw from Holmes County, over in Shipshewana, Indiana, there is another Amish-operated business named National RV Refrigeration. Their game plan involves stripping down aging absorption chilling units pulled from campers and completely overhauling them on the shop floor. Glenn Miller, the proprietor, explained to a journalist that the sheer beauty of gas absorption technology is ultimately its repairability. When a standard 12-volt compressor cooler dies, it is basically junk. The entire enclosed mechanism gets tossed into a dump, but a fire-driven cooler simply receives a fresh set of coils, and the exact same metal box keeps on freezing for another 2 decades. Glenn's operation churns out multiple complete overhauls every single workday. They actually purchased all the surplus inventory from numerous camper brands when the RV industry pivoted toward 12-volt compressors. They then turned around and peddled those refurbished thermal systems to off-grid preppers, hunting lodge owners, and Amish communities stretching right across the Midwest. These machines are far from antiquated. They merely exist entirely outside the economic loop constructed specifically to render them extinct. The thermodynamics, the chemical reactions, and the blueprints themselves were completely flawless. They just happened to be incredibly bad for quarterly profit margins. Now, here is the piece of the puzzle that brings everything full circle. Back in 2008, a squad of electrical engineers stationed at Oxford University, spearheaded by Malcolm McCulloch over in the Energy and Power Group, actually resurrected Einstein's initial 1930 design. Their announced mission was to engineer refrigeration for remote villages in developing nations totally cut off from electrical infrastructure. Their primary objective was to take the Einstein-Szilard concept and boost its efficiency fourfold by incorporating contemporary alloys and advanced thermal exchangers. That specific engineering effort is actively continuing today. In 2026, housed within one of the most prestigious academic institutions on the planet, that identical blueprint Einstein drafted in Germany in 1926, finalized in DC on November 11, 1930, and subsequently buried in a filing cabinet by Electrolux, might actually be poised for a massive global comeback nearly a century after the ink dried. And it is not because somebody discovered a radical new scientific law, but simply because humanity finally decided to remember it. There is this particular German phrase woven deeply into Amish spiritual life, Gelassenheit. You cannot neatly convert it to English, but roughly, it implies surrendering to the natural flow of things. It is the core belief that the world inherently contains a sustainable equilibrium, one that was functioning perfectly fine long before consumer catalogs, monthly subscriptions, and planned obsolescence ever existed. Out in the dirt, that philosophy looks like natural compost rather than chemical fertilizers. Right there in Amos's home, it takes the shape of a fire no bigger than a matchstick, keeping his groceries frozen solid for 29 years straight, entirely free of a utility bill. The $117 billion cooling sector actively relies on you shelling out for a fresh unit every 13 years, cutting a check to the power company every single month, and fundamentally never questioning if a silent alternative exists that could handle the exact same task forever on a simple jug of propane. The Amish posed that exact question back in 1927, the moment Serval opened its doors in Indiana. They simply never bothered to stop asking. And the solution has been humming quietly behind a piece of metal in their homes from that day forward. If you happen to maintain a hunting lodge, a workshop, an off-grid plot, or even just an old beer fridge humming away in your garage 365 days a year, hit the comments down below. Let me know what state you are in and exactly what your electric utility charges you every month. I comb through every single reply, and your feedback actively dictates what rabbit hole I dive down next. If you are the type of viewer who suspects that genuine innovation gets systematically hidden away merely to safeguard corporate bottom lines, then you know the drill. Hit subscribe. Because in my next upload, I am going to break down a traditional Amish culinary setup that operates on one piece of firewood and effectively replaces your stovetop, your baking oven, and your home's water heater with a single masonry build. And the global market that contraption threatens makes the appliance industry seem like pocket change.